I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Welcome to another episode of Women's Health Unplugged. I'm Dr. Jordan Robertson. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I am so excited to have this conversation today. We have on the show Dr. Sheva Marcus. She is a women's sexual health expert. She's just published her book, Sex Points. I can't wait to have this conversation with you. We've been Instagram buddies for a little while, you and I.
Yeah, I stalked you. Let's be honest here. I stalked Jordan for a while. I loved her posts. They made me laugh. And I also, they were so smart. And it's, one of the fun things about Instagram is you meet these incredible, people, or women in my case mostly. And I stalked her for a while, but now we're buddies.
Now it's mutual because now I think I'm equally stalking you back. But Sheva, I'm so excited to have you on and talk about this topic. We've planned this for a long time. Your book has just launched. To me, you are such a breath of fresh air when it comes to listening about women's sexual health and the support that your book provides for women and couples around helping distill down so many of the myths around libido and pleasure and desire that I face in clinical practice every day. I would love if you could just, introduce yourself, tell us about your clinic, because you have a beautiful, huge sexual health clinic, and tell us the story for how you got to where you are, because your PhD story, I think, is one that needs to be shared.
Oh my God. All right. I'll try to make this short because so yes, I'm Sheva Marcus. I'm the clinical director of Maze Women's Sexual Health. We're the largest sexual health center, independent sexual health center in the country. We approach sexual health, which I guess you'll hear about because that's what the book is about, from the dual lens of the medical or physiological and the psychological, understanding that those things are super important. And that's how our center works. So if you come to Maze Women's Health, and there's Maze Men's also, you see a therapist and you see a medical practitioner, and they work hand in hand with you to fix the problem. So that is, and I think what you're talking about is my PhD thesis, which was on vibrator use in women. Is that what you mean? Oh, that's so funny.
That is exactly what I mean. To me, I feel like that's the most exciting PhD thesis I've ever heard in my life.
They say that when you're doing a PhD, you have to pick something that's really interesting to you. And it was. And what was fascinating to me, honestly, was that there was no research on it. And I talk about this in the book, the fact that, vibrators are one of the most underused tools in women's toolbox, in women's toolkits. But the truth is, almost nobody had done any research on it when I did this research 20 years ago. And I was fascinated by it. And so it made it, I can't say it wasn't a little bit of a slog, but for the most part, I really loved doing it. So and that's who I am, and that's what Maze is. And I'm happy to answer more questions, but I could just go on and on for 2 hours on that. That is not what you want.
Well, let's talk about your book, because to me, so for the missing pieces there that you're kind of identifying in women's health. And just before we hit record, I mentioned this quote that I've heard that I love that says, is it the gynecologist's job to treat the mental health aspect of women's health, or is it the psychiatrist's job to know about hormones? And really, because we've subspecialtied so much in medicine, we do this kind of disservice to women where you go see one practitioner for one thing and another practitioner for another thing. And yet sexual health really requires, and so much of women's health requires, this more integrative approach. And that's not really available for women. I'd love if you could sort of walk us through how, you've developed sort of these concepts and how you see it work with the women you work with.
So one of the things that happened, I think, when we opened the Women's Center about 20 years ago, was we realized how important it was to merge the psychological and the medical and have them work in tandem. And honestly, the Men's Center then, which was bigger, sort of followed suit afterwards as well. Because I think, Jordan, you're 100% right. medicine in general has to start understanding that the body and the mind work together. They're not independent, units that work, apart from each other. So, I love the study. There was a study done a bunch of years ago, I don't know if you saw it, where men who stay home with their children, their testosterone drops. So like we get a little bit that our hormones affect us, but I don't think we realize how much our behavior and what we do also affects our hormones. So exactly that. Like you have doctors who are either tossing medicine at women or saying, I don't see anything when there's pain. And then you have therapists who are saying, your vagina is telling you maybe it's not ready to have sex. And I'm thinking, well, maybe your vagina is telling you it's time to find a new therapist. So, we need to understand that when women have problems, and women are very smart, Jordan, like they kind of know when something is the matter, and that we really need to have a much better support from the psychological perspective and to have more knowledgeable medical professionals who actually can address issues and not just push them off to the therapist because they don't see anything. I don't know if I actually answered your question or I just wandered around in a circle just now. Was the response?
No, that's perfect. And I think that's exactly like one of the goals with the podcast is to help women realize that they like to trust themselves, right? Like if something is not right, then I want them to be able to trust that, even if they've maybe been told once or twice that, what they're looking for doesn't exist, or what they want isn't possible, or that it's even selfish to want what they want in their health. The thing that I find so fascinating about this concept around libido is that it's kind of this enigma to women and their health, right? They don't understand it. It feels mysterious. I don't think we spend enough time educating women about all the components that build libido. I think women wait for desire to slap them across the face rather than recognizing that it's something that needs to be practiced and built. And the concepts that you introduce in the book around the multi sort of areas that impact desire and arousal, I think really can help women deeply understand what's going on with their sexual health in a way that like is so easy to digest. Can you explain that sort of point system that you talk about in the book? Because I would love for my listeners to sort of take that away from the conversation.
Absolutely. So I'm laughing because the New York Times did a review of the book yesterday, and they called it Sudoku for stuffing. So I think that was what somebody said to me, I need a t-shirt that says that. So I was like, oh, that's one way to look at it. Right. So here's the thing, Jordan, women come in and they're a little baffled. Like they don't know what it is that's wrong with their sex life. They know it's not working. They know something's not working for them, but they're just sort of don't know where to start. It feels overwhelming. They feel broken. And on a certain level, I think they really feel like it can't be helped. And that's where I want to jump in and say, whoa there, of course you can be helped. And this is not magic. This is actually understandable. So let's try to break this into components that will make you be able to understand what's happening in your body. So when a woman comes in and wants to know what's broken, it's almost like she sees things as binary. Like there's an on and off switch. Like what's broken, Batsheva, let's find it and let's turn it on. And I'll say that is not a very effective way to look at your sex life. I want you to look at your sex life from now on as an amalgam of a lot of things that give you points. And when you hit 100 points, you're good to go. So if you're at 130 points, it doesn't really matter if you're overtired or you just had a little squabble with your partner because you got a certain range of points there. So you're still fine. If you're at 100, you're kind of functioning, but if you're at 80, nothing is working. And so the question then becomes, how do you get points? Where do you get points from? How do you get points? And so my goal with you with this book is to get you at least to this 100-point threshold. And it starts with this 32 question questionnaire, which, people love questionnaires. I feel like it's a little like Cosmo-y, my questionnaire. My kids will roll their eyes at my questionnaire, but I think it's really helpful. And I actually have a link. So if you're not somebody who likes to tally things up, there's a link in the book so you can do it electronically. It makes it neat and clean, and it gives you your full score, but also your score in things I bring to four, what I call the quadrants, the 4 areas that you need to be addressing or understanding in order to fix your sex life. And those 4 quadrants are pain. That's pretty clear what that is, although I don't think women are as honest about how often they have pain and how quickly it's dismissed, but we can talk about that. Problems with desire. I don't really feel like having sex. Problems with arousal. I want to have sex, but I don't get turned on. We can talk about how those are separate, and many women mix those two things up, and that's not helpful. And problems with orgasm. They can't have orgasms. They're weaker than they used to be. They seem to be going on hiatus, all of the issues with orgasms. So those are the 4 quadrants. And what you'll find when you take the quiz, I hope, is at the end, all of a sudden, what seemed so baffling and overwhelming now starts to feel a lot more manageable, right? I look like I'm missing a lot of points in this one area. And here is why this low quadrant may be affecting the other quadrants. I think it gives women a sense of, oh, here's the picture, the snapshot picture of my sex life. It's not so crazy. I'm having a lot of pain, and that is affecting my desire, maybe not arousal, maybe my orgasm, or I'm not getting turned on, and that's affecting my desire, and maybe that's even affecting my pain threshold. So let's start on that quadrant. And like, I like to look at the book a little bit like Choose Your Own Adventure, because once you finish the questionnaire and you have the quadrants and you see your scores, it's like, are you low on me here? Try chapters 8, 10, and 12. Are you having pain issues? Try chapters 9, 11, and 14. So it's not a book that you have to feel like you have to read from cover to cover, although I think there's a lot in there that could just be useful. But I do feel like it's a book that will take an area that's so painful for so many women. Their sex life just feels overwhelming and befuddling and confusing and out of their control. And I want to empower women to feel like it's not so complicated. You can have this like really good snapshot view, and you can take control to make things better.
And so in each of those quadrants, I'm assuming like the solutions are slightly different, right? And I think there's just a beautiful image in the book of all the different potential therapies. But I'm curious, like when you start to think about each of those individual areas, like what are some of those solutions? Like pain, I think pain, and to me in part is mostly about like problematic assessment, where women maybe not are not voicing what is going on, or they're not being as honest about how much pain they have, which I don't think means we assess them very well. But you're right, like that we dismiss a lot of vaginal pain for women, and we normalize it, right, as something that maybe is supposed to be there or runs in the family. Like I've heard all of the things. So if we can go through each of those 4 areas, like what does a solution look like for women who score high on the pain scores?
So pain is mind blowing to me, because when people come in with problems, I try to be as honest as I can. In many cases, we can make things better. We may not be able to make them perfect, but we can make them better. With pain, it's like a home run. And there's almost no situation where we can't solve your pain problem. And yet, we hear the craziest things. We have women come in and say, the doctor said, well, let's wait till it gets really terrible before we start addressing. Like, just insanity. And so I have a nice, healthy section in there on pain, because pain usually comes down to some variation of tight muscles, hormonal imbalances, or neurological issues. I mean, those are the 3. And so, people who are starting out on their sex life will often have vaginismus, which, is just so ubiquitous. The tight muscles, and you will see that at different times during your life. Like, you may have tight muscles when you first start having intercourse. You may have tight muscles after you have a baby. You may have tight muscles as you head into perimenopause or menopause. The women who are starting out early also have a lot of fear. And literally, I do hour lectures on primary vaginismus, the pain that young women have. And if you're somebody listening to this and you feel like you're the worst case, which I hear all the time, I am the worst case, I cannot get anything to my vagina, it feels like I'm slamming into a brick wall, or I can get something in and it hurts, don't live with it. Because what happens is, with all of these pain conditions, the secondary problems that develop are so much worse, Jordan, than the problem itself. And if you come in with vaginismus, I promise you, and we have women who are flying in from all over the world to get treated for vaginismus, because we have more complicated treatments than just the classic treatments. I promise you we can fix it. What we can't always fix, or what takes much longer to fix, is the feeling of brokenness that women start feeling about themselves. How awful they feel, like what's done to the relationships if they have one, what it's done in terms of avoidance of relationships if they are avoidant, what's done to their self-esteem and their sense of like normalcy in this world. And those are much harder to fix than tight muscles. So really and truly, tight muscles are a biggie. They show up a lot. They're easier to treat when there's no fear, and it's later on in life after you've had a good sex life. But it's complicated, but it can be done. Hormonally mediated problems that hormonal, that can start from with pain, that can start from being on birth control pills. Some women, and we don't understand why some women do fine on birth control pills, but others really react very poorly to them in terms of having pain. Other medications you're on can have an impact on your, on your hormones. So again, pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, perimenopause, no, all those things are hormones, and we ignore them, and we've given estrogen such a bad rap, and so unfairly. And the reality is that in almost every situation, if there's pain, it can be solved. But I do think it's super helpful for women to understand it and say, oh, wait a minute, this is the kind of pain I'm having. This may be the primary components. Let me talk to the doctor about it in a way that maybe she can be more helpful to me with it than just sort of, I'm in pain. Or like, there's something wrong with me, I'm just going to ignore it. Or I'm too busy, I'm just going to ignore it. Like, you're not too busy. You shouldn't have vaginal pain. If you had a sprained ankle, you would get yourself to the doctor. If your vagina is not working, get help. And if one doctor doesn't see a problem, find another doctor. They are out there. You can get help for it.
You are not too busy. Fix your vagina. I feel like that's that is the take home from this.
Totally. I'm going to see that on a meme on one of your.
That's right. You are not too busy. You fix your vagina. But I love that, because the anxiety that comes for those women, like I like how you said, like the secondary fallout from the pain is often around the psychological distress that women then have around intercourse, and that becomes such a big beast to try and overcome, right? That even if we do start to tackle the actual physical pain, the anxiety and the tension that women have around intercourse related to, because of their fear of pain, is a big mountain to climb too.
Huge. I mean, I often, when I'm giving grad rounds to doctors, I'll show them like a chart, and I'll say, like, think of the x-axis as being the fear and the y-axis as being the tight muscles. And, depending on where the woman falls in there, there's some women who don't have such tight muscles but have incredible amounts of fear. And there's some women who have, small amounts of fear and very tight muscles. And then you have the ones who have very tight muscles and a lot of fear. And how you work with them, and this is why it's so powerful to have the therapist working with the medical practitioner, right? Because you can say till you're blue in the face, and I do this, like I'll talk to doctors and I'll say to them, you have a the hole in your eye, it's a pupil, right? And I'm just going to take this little pen. You just sit there. I'm going to slide this pen into your eye, into the hole in your eye. And you would say, like, no way in hell, get the hell away from me, You're not coming at me with something into my eye. That's how a lot of these primary vaginismus patients feel. They feel like they're not sure there's a hole there. There's so much pain in their brain associated with this. You are not, we call them table jumpers. They're like off and running to the next state before you can even get there to do this, the exam. And that has to be taken seriously. And they need to learn how to relax, and they need to learn how to get their brain and their vagina communicating again. So we need to be working on the physical piece and working on the psychological piece at the same time.
So the desire arousal thing, because that helped me when I went through that and read the difference between the two. I don't know if I had even separated the two of them as beautifully as you do in the book. Can you explain the difference between the two? Because I think you're right that women think of it as like a light switch, right? On, off, and they're probably grouping those two in together.
Women are always mixing up desire and arousal. And I get why, because they're very intertwined, but they are separate. So desire could be, I really would like to have sex. That would be desire. I want to have sex, and not necessarily I'm turned on, but like my brain, I want to have sex. And arousal, you would talk about getting turned on, getting wet, getting tingly, getting that laundry list of things to stop running through your head. Now, why they're separate and why it's important to understand that they're separate is because let's say I could have a woman in my office and she'll say, and you'll tell me if that sounds familiar. She'll, like, I don't know, let's say a 45-year-old woman, and she'll say something like, I don't understand it. I don't want to have sex. I really don't want to have sex. Like, my partner has to drag me into the room to basically have sex, or I keep avoiding it. And then when we get started, it's really good. I get turned on. I get wet. I have an orgasm. It feels good. I'm really happy. We feel close. And then I don't want to do it again. Right? Like, so what the hell is that about? So that would be an example of where, the arousal's fine, the desire's a problem.
I've had women describe it like going to the gym, right? Like, I really, really, really don't want to go. But after I went, I was kind of happy I did.
So then, no, exactly. So, and that's actually a good analogy, which I think we should come back to, because I think we have to think of, if we think about it a little bit more in that way, it might actually be helpful to some women. I just think people are horrified at the idea of comparing your sex life to your exercise life. But I digress. So desire, somebody who has desire, somebody who wants to have sex, they're like, I really would like to have sex. I'm like, I'm in there, but then I don't get turned on, and so it sucks. And so then I don't want to have sex, but my desire is essentially in place. I just am not getting turned on. So I think those are slightly different pathways in the brain, and I think that they get addressed a little differently. And I think for a lot of women, it's an aha moment to separate those two things and be able to address them sort of more appropriately in each case. So, yeah. So I do
Is
think
desire always about your partner?
So that is a great question, Jordan. So here's where I think this is a really interesting piece. We have assumed that women are better with monogamy than men. I feel like that is like like if there's a myth out there that everybody's kind of bought into, it's that men have trouble with monogamy, but women are really okay with monogamy. But you know what? The data is not supporting that anymore. And I think what's happening, this is my theory on this because I've seen it again and again, the men are allowed to whine. The men who are in long-term, they're allowed to whine about it. They're allowed to joke around about it. They do some flirting. They do some fantasizing. They watch some erotica or whatever. And then they're actually really pretty happy to have sex with their wife or their long-term partner. And that they're good. The women also are not great with monogamy, but feel so guilty about it and feels the fact that they're not interested in their long-term partner. They are thinking about the firemen down the block, and I don't know what it is with firemen, but they seem to like hold sway over many women's fantasy lives. I think it's a carrying you out of the building thing. They, I think, just shut down. I think women just feel guilty about the fact that they're not really interested in their partner. They're not willing to kind of explore or experiment in their brains with the idea that, yeah, maybe they aren't going to be thinking all those hot thoughts about the same freaking person for 50 years of their life, and that it's perfectly normal and natural to be interested in other people and to just revel in that and bring it back to your partner. And so they just shut down, and then we start thinking women as being not interested in sex or not sexual beings. So I think that when you look at desire, one of the things, and you sort of started talking about this a little bit, I think before we hit record, but I'm not sure, but I think the idea that desire should just magically descend upon you like pixie dust. Like it's gonna, I think the term you used was slap you across the face. Like,
Right. Yeah. Because when I'm talking to women about like even that word sex drive, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, that even that is a little bit of a misnomer. That's like makes it sound like thirst, right? Like that one day you're going to wake up and go, oh my God, it's been 48 hours since I've had sex. I must have sex today. And that's just not how libido works, right? And so but women think that desire is something that will slap them across the face, not something that needs to be nurtured and practiced.
right. And also people think that desire needs to start a sexual encounter, and it doesn't. You don't need desire to start a sexual encounter. You don't want to be aversive, and I talk about this in the book. You don't want to specifically not want to have sex, but you don't need to wake up and think, oh, I really want to have sex now in any kind of physiological sense. You can decide in your brain, I really would like to have sex now because it makes me happy, because it makes my partner happy, because it makes us feel closer, because the orgasm feels good, because it makes me feel relaxed, for any of those reasons. And then you have to be able to access the arousal that then you get turned on, and then often the desire will then kick in. That's the model that Rosemary Basson came up with. I think it's a great model. But I think as soon as you realize that desire is something that you can nurture, you can make it happen, you get into a habit of it. I am often talking about scheduling sex, which people think is so unsexy, but that's a whole conversation. I think we should have that. And you can access your desire. And some of it is also learning to see your partner in a slightly different way than maybe you have been seeing your partner. Because I think we do a good job sort of demystifying our partners to make it super comfortable. And that's just not very sexy. So I think you're 100% right. Desire is something that doesn't happen naturally, that you can work on, that you can make a decision you want to have happen in your life. And you don't absolutely need desire to get started having sex. So all of those things kind of play a role in, again, the number of points you're willing to amass and accumulate in order to have a good sex life.
I love it. And I like that gym analogy. It really does actually kind of fit when you put it in that way.
So can I just say there were years and years where I didn't use that gym analogy because I was afraid to, because I was afraid that in our overly romanticized view of sex, people would be like, oh my God, Bashava, how could you compare sex, magic, sparkly sex to moving? I don't even like to think exercise. I like to think more like moving in our lives. And then all of a sudden I was like, you know what? It fits perfectly. Most of us know what that feels like. Sometimes you have to kind of push yourself to get off the chair to go take that walk, and then you feel so good that you did it. And you know that the more you do it, the happier you are, the better your life is, the easier it is. You start finding things you really love to do, whether that's playing tennis or tap dancing. Like, you find the things that give you joy and happiness. Some days you're more into it, some days you're less into it, but as soon as you've made exercise or movement a regular part of your life is better. And I think that that's true about sex. So I think it is a fabulous analogy. It's just a little hard for us to give up some of our Disney romantic, overly glorified views of what sex should be, because, for some of us, it was like that for the first 6 months of our relationship. And that's amazing. But the question is, you want to have sex for the rest of your life because it's going to make your life better and it's going to make your body healthier and it's going to make your partnership better? Or do you want to kind of sit around and wait for some magic to come passing through you, which usually only happens if you start with a new partner for 6 months, and that has its cost also.
Eventually, the princess and the prince. I've been living
Yes,
together for
do
a
the laundry.
while. Someone's peeing with the door open, and all of the things that totally ruin it.
And I also want to say here that one of the things I was thinking a lot about is that you don't need a partner to have a good sex life. I really feel very strongly about that. Like, sex for one is not only legitimate sex, it's great sex. You're know when you're in the mood, but those things hold for that too. You may have to schedule yourself for time for that also, because you get busy, and now it's not 2 people schedules, it's one, but it's just as easy to kind of put it off. And so I just want to throw that out there. I feel like sex for one, we have to stop minimizing that, because it's super important.
For sure. And even when I'm working with women and going through those questions, I even ask about that because sometimes that can help women see the difference between desire and arousal and orgasm. Because again, it's not that one silo of like just penetrative intercourse, yes, no, right? There's also lots of other pieces of their sexual health that they may be way more eager to participate in than
Right.
missionary penetrative intercourse with their partner.
So what you're talking about is partnered sex, which is not intercourse, which I'm always running around saying intercourse and sex are not synonymous. Like, where do we get that idea? That's ridiculous. For most women, a lot of the pleasure comes from things besides intercourse. So, okay. But I'm talking about solo sex, but you should still be having regular sex life. That is what I want to make sure that everybody hearing this knows that. Like, sex is good for everyone, whether you're single, whether you're in a couple, whether you're in a open marriage. Sex is a good thing to be having. So what you're talking about now is the fact that we need to expand our repertoires, and that this, kiss for 5 minutes, go straight to intercourse sex is not working for anybody, especially not the women. It's probably not working so well for the partners either, if we're being honest. So we need to face that and address that as well. It also takes away points when you do it. You can get points by doing other things. Just saying that. Just saying.
It takes away points to have the vanilla
rote everyday sex. It's better to do that than nothing, but is not a good. It's certainly not a point giver. Let's be honest.
So the other quadrant there is the orgasm piece. And I think one of the things I benefited from hanging out with you on Instagram and following along your content is looking at you breaking down some of the myths around orgasm for women, because I think I don't even know how to put it, like that almost has been de-emphasized as the end goal for so much of a woman's sex life. And should that be the priority? Should that be the goal that women are working towards? I would love for you to kind of demystify some of that for the audience.
So I'm going to get shot if I'm answering that honestly, but I probably will answer that honestly anyway, because that's my life. I think people have been running around saying, stop focusing on the orgasm, stop focusing on the orgasm. And I think people meant well by doing that, because they wanted to be able to have people not being focused on the end goal all the time. And I'm all about that. Like, sex is about a much broader array of activities with orgasm at the end. But I do think orgasm is really important. And I think the data suggests that people who have orgasms are more likely to keep wanting to have sex, for sure, than the people who almost get to orgasm and kind of can't do it at that point. So while I don't think that a person should go into a sexual or with this idea like I need to have an orgasm, I think the difference between sex and cuddling, or sex and making out or fooling around, is in the end the goal of orgasm. So if you ask me how I define sex, I will tell you it's any activity for one or more people where the goal, whether you get there or not, is to have an orgasm, right? That's what makes something sex, as opposed to cuddling with somebody or just having a makeout session. And I'm sure that's a very unpopular answer, but I do think that if you have an orgasm and you can have them and reach orgasm without that much trouble, it will make the sex better. And it looks like the data suggests that there's 5% of women who can't reach orgasm. 3 out of 10 women, 30% can have one with intercourse. I'm sure your listeners know this, but I need to say it again anyway. Only 3 out of 10 women, 30% of women, can have an orgasm from a penis alone in their vagina. So you're not crazy and you're not broken if you can't. And stop listening to the guys who tell you every partner could, because their partners were lying, they were faking it, or they had a totally skewed sample. 70 to 80% can have one with a hand or a mouth. Okay, around 94 to 95% can have one with a vibrator. And then there's 5% who seem to not be able to have orgasms, and that's a whole other conversation, and we can talk about that. But I think orgasms are really fun, important, and achievable for most women, and should be sustainable. This is what kills me. Sometimes you have them and then they go on hiatus after you have a baby, after you go perimenopausal, menopausal, birth control pills, anti-anxiety medication. Any of those things can really have an impact on your orgasms, and you don't have to live like that. Like, you can. It's really, for women who are used to having orgasms, it's really frustrating not to have an orgasm. I mean, and you shouldn't have to not have an orgasm. And there's medications that can help. There's hormones that can help. There are vibrators, which I think are just the most underused tool in women's toolkits, to be honest with you. Super helpful, super non-invasive, super employable. I have a whole thing on the book about how to talk to your partners about that, if that makes you nervous. So orgasms should be, and it's not psychological. Can I just tell you, the number of women who I feel like spent 2 years talking with their therapists about the fact that, or with their couples counselor about the fact that they stopped having orgasms, and I'm like, I think this is a neurotransmitter issue, and let's just try you on some Wellbutrin, because the communication is not going to get back the orgasm. So now, that's not to minimize if you're furious at your partner, if your partner's had 3 affairs, if you don't trust your partner. Yes, it may have significant impact on parts of your sex life. I don't want to minimize that at all, but I think we have to be realistic about what we're talking about, and the rabbit holes, the endless rabbit holes that women will fall down trying to work out the emotional pieces of their relationship, when it's actually a physiological piece.
So I want to sort of wrap up. I'd love for you to sort of describe, I think you've got such a great message for our women. I would love for you to just sort of finish off by letting us know what your purpose and passion is. I mean, I know we can tell just by listening to us talk for the last 45 minutes about what you're passionate about, but I want to know like kind of what that higher mission is, because you've been on this journey for a long time. So you've probably said lots of controversial things that have empowered women everywhere, but also probably drawn criticism at points in your career. Like, what is your big message for women? What do you want them to leave this episode? But also, I want them to go buy your book. What do you want them to take away from your book?
So I want women to believe that they're not broken. They're not abnormal. Their sex life is not a big mystery, and you can fix it. You can. If I could take women by the hand, like hold their hands and look into their eyes and say to them, you got this. You totally got this. This is not some magical elixir that some people have and some people don't have. You just need to understand what's happening in your body and where you can help yourself. And then you can help yourself. And that is the entire purpose of this book. And I really hope that women come out feeling that way when they read the book.
Like they deserve it, right? Like when I hear you saying that, it's like
Yes.
we want women to know that they deserve that part of their health.
It.
Yeah.
You absolutely deserve it. And you not only do you deserve it and you can do it, right? Like it's not like I'm so sad when I feel like women feel like, oh, there's other people who can have good sex, but not me. And I'm like, no, you can have good sex. You have to believe in yourself. You have to believe that you could do it. You have to believe you deserve it, exactly what you're saying. And then you totally got this.
I love it. How can people get a copy of your book?
It's everywhere. Amazon. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Nobles. It's on all the indie, in the indie publisher bookstores. Dr. Batsheva, my website, DrBatsheva, Dr. Batsheva. That's how you follow me on Instagram too. But the book is, all the links to all the sellers are on the website. I'd love to hear from people, hear what they think about it, and I'd love, to just keep this conversation going because I think it's so important.
It's so important. And thank you so much. We will put all the links to all of those things in the show notes. And so you can link right to it to get yourself a copy. I'm so grateful that I've had the chance to go through the book. I know that it's going to improve the way that I can approach this with my women in clinical practice. And it's such an easy, digestible, broken down resource for women. I'm so grateful that you took the time to take all of your gifts and all of your knowledge and put that out for people to benefit from. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much. Your podcast about the whole idea of empowering women to be able to find help, is just an inspiration to all of us. So thank you for having me, and let's just keep this conversation going.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. It's my absolute passion to bring women quality and science-informed information about their health so that they can make empowered, good decisions about their health care. I'd like to invite you to join me in my Facebook community, Women's Health Unplugged. There we share live videos, blog posts, and behind-the-scenes information about the podcast, where you can connect with me and other women who are interested in their health care. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/WH Unplugged. We'll see you there.